Hey everyone, Milkman234 here, and welcome to another episode of Forgotten Media, where I dig up some stuff you may or may not have heard of. Back in the early 90s, it was a very experimental time in making computer-generated imagery in film. It's nothing like today where we can easily find those kind of films anywhere. And when it comes to the more classic and memorable CGI films, Toy Story is usually the one high up on the list. Ah yes, Toy Story. Pixar's first full-length film and the beginning of the entertainment in CGI films. I didn't see the first film in theaters, but I remember watching it a lot on VHS. All the characters were great, the story was fun, and for what early CGI was like back then, it works well using toys as characters, and it still looks great to this day, for the most part. Then there was the sequel, which was also great, and this time I got to see it in theaters. And then years later we got a third one. At first I was a bit skeptical because of how second sequels are usually cursed to be bad, but then I saw the movie in theaters and I was genuinely surprised that it was really good. And yeah, that ending still makes me cry whenever I see it. Nowadays we have Toy Story 4, turning this trilogy of films into a 4-part saga. Which is the perfect time to take a look at some story ideas for the Toy Story Trilogy that ended up getting drastically changed before their big releases. So without further ado, it's time to take a look at the original Toy Story Trilogy. There are a lot of interesting ideas for Toy Story, such as how it was originally going to star Tinny from the short tin toy that they made, or how Woody was originally going to be this ventriloquist dummy, and for the longest time he was a ventriloquist cowboy, and then finally just a cowboy doll. But the one version I'm going to be focusing on is the Black Friday reel, an early pitch for the film that only exists in storyboards. When Pixar got the okay from Disney to work on the project, lots of ideas were made, changed, and then changed again, while showing them to the executives and chairmen at Disney. One such higher-up at the time was Jeffrey Katzenberg, who pushed the company to make the film for an older audience, have more of an edge to it. Yeah, a film about kids' toys being in this edgy film. Now, if the project was about sex toys, then that would be a completely different story. Well, anyway, out of all the feedback they got, it seemed like they listened to Jeffrey Katzenberg's ideas the most, and tried to make it more adult and edgy. Now keep in mind, Pixar was still very new at the time. Making a full-length CGI movie was a challenge for them, instead of making short films. And they didn't have a lot of trust with each other, hence why they took a lot of notes from Katzenberg and the other higher-ups. One thing that is known about the original film was that Woody was portrayed as a very mean, cynical guy who acted like he was this high and mighty ruler of the toys in Andy's room, and Slinky was usually his slave that carried out his orders. And the way he dealt with Buzz Lightyear was, not that friendly. So we all know what he does to him in the final film, right? He tries to knock Buzz behind Andy's desk, but then his hasty actions causes a chain of events that ends with Buzz getting knocked out of the window, by accident. Well, in the Black Friday reel, Woody grabs Buzz and deliberately throws him out the window. Man, what an asshole. And then after much conflict and arguing with the other toys, they decide to do the same to Woody. And then I guess after that they hear Andy coming back and they return to their places or something. So they put together a storyboard of half of the film, at least that's what I've heard, and they showed it to Disney. And they really didn't like it. Even Katzenberg didn't like it. They told Pixar to shut down production, but after much debate and discussions, they came to an agreement. Disney allowed Pixar to re-storyboard the project the way they wanted it to be within 2 weeks. And that's what they did, putting most of the work in fixing Woody's character. So they showed Disney the newer version, they got the green light, and the rest is history. I could only imagine what the reception would be this very bitter and cynical project. The scene where Woody throws Buzz out the window is the only known segment from the reel that is available in bonus features on DVDs and Blu-rays of the movie. There are some clips that are shown in said features, as well as a document on the history of Pixar that don't appear in that scene, so it leaves you wondering what other scenes were from that reel. Were they just some of those deleted storyboard scenes on the bonus features, or could there have been even more lost scenes in how mean-spirited this movie was originally going to be? We may never know, although there are some creepypastas out there where they come up with their own exaggerated ideas of what could have happened in the Black Friday reel. And that was Toy Story's Black Friday reel. There might be some lost segments, but for what we have, I'm sure we're all glad that this version of Toy Story wasn't made. Now, the sequel was originally going to be a direct-to-video movie before it was re-scripted and released into theaters. The original script has a lot of different moments that are not in the final film, but for the most part, it's still the same premise. Andy's off at a camp and the toys are keeping themselves entertained until he comes back. Woody gets kidnapped by a greedy toy collector, and it's up to Buzz and the other toys to go after him and rescue their friend. Woody then has to deal with the choice of staying at a museum dedicated to an old show based around him, or return to Andy's room to be what he is. The script can be found online, and I'll only be covering a few interesting segments that happen in the script. If I talked about the entire thing, then we'd be here all day. So, one thing that happens is that while the toys are having fun, there's a scene where the Green Army men are relaxing and using a See and Say toy as a roulette wheel. What's interesting about this idea is that it would actually be carried over into Toy Story 3. Woody's leg gets ripped with some stuffing falling out, and that's it. It's not as interesting in the final film where Woody's arm gets ripped and it becomes motionless until it gets fixed. After Woody gets kidnapped by Al, the toys host some kind of a funeral scene. A big picture of Woody is on display, and the toys pay their respects and talk about how they felt for their fallen friend. After Woody is taken to Al's apartment, Al himself fixes up Woody, cleaning him up, taking care of that burnt mark on his forehead, the works. I find it interesting how they kept that little bit of detail of the burnt mark in that script, since we don't see that in the final film. Woody's Roundup gang is present in this draft, consisting of Prospector, Bullseye, and a talking cactus lady named Senorita Cactus. Bullseye was originally going to have a voice, and talks about how he misses the days that he was being played with by children, rather than being stuck as a collectible. The Prospector and Senorita Cactus are the villains in this draft, who are described as neat freaks, keeping themselves clean and polished to preserve their collectability, and they slowly bring Woody onto their side when they show him how expensive he is. The scene where Buzz and the gang go to Al's toy barn is much shorter. There's no Barbies that they need, and Buzz's encounter with the new Buzz, nicknamed Ultra Buzz in the script, is also much shorter. Their tussle causes a Zurg figure to come out of his box and tries to attack them, and of course Andy's Buzz manages to deal with him easily. And that's it. No fake Buzz hijacking the movie, and no battle with Zurg on the elevator. The rescue mission at Al's apartment is much different in the original script, where it's just Buzz trying to save Woody. The other toys are left outside for a good chunk of the scene. And the climax for the film was not at an airport, but a car chase scene where the toys hijack Al's car, and then Al chases after them using a Pizza Planet truck. Prospector and Senorita Cactus fight off Woody on top of the roof, and Bullseye comes in to save the day, finally standing up for himself and boots the two neat freaks off the car. And those are some of the elements that are in the original script. And overall, it's okay, but obviously the final film was much better. And now we come to our last film, the Circle 7 version of Toy Story 3. Back then, Pixar wasn't really part of Disney. They were just working with them under a 7-film distribution agreement. After that agreement was complete, Pixar was going to go out on their own to make their own movies. But since Disney had the rights to the characters that they had created, they planned to make an animation studio to make direct-to-video sequels to Pixar movies, and thus Circle 7 was created in 2004. Yeah, you know how Disney used to do those direct-to-video movie sequels of their popular films? Yeah, Circle 7 was going to be the Pixar version of that. The projects they had planned was a sequel to Finding Nemo, a sequel to Monsters, Inc., and of course, Toy Story 3. In their version of the movie, it's just another typical day for the toys in Andy's room. That is, until Buzz Lightyear starts malfunctioning. So Andy's mom sends Buzz to Taiwan, the place where he was made, to get him fixed. Shortly after this, Woody and the gang find out that there's been a massive recall on all Buzz Lightyear toys. And fearing that their friend might be destroyed, they begin a rescue mission to save Buzz. And they have some crazy events during their rescue mission, such as being taken to a daycare center for a while. And then they escape and make it to Taiwan using a shopping cart, balloons, and I've heard people say that it's a vacuum, but to me it kind of looks more like a leaf blower. Meanwhile, in Taiwan, Buzz is taken to the factory where he was created, and comes across a bunch of other toys who have malfunctioned and been recalled, as well as having a close call from almost being destroyed by a machine for broken toys. The plot sounds interesting, but it doesn't really have that much of a passion to it. In some ways, it feels like a role reversal of Toy Story 2. Also, I feel like this would have a lot of depressing scenes since there are some concept art showing a damaged Buzz, while Woody and the gang are desperately trying to repair him. So, in the end, the idea was scrapped and only a handful of concept art exists, as well as some test footage of Woody and an alien, giving us an idea of how the animation might have looked like. Although some elements were carried over into other Toy Story films, mostly the daycare scene being a main focus in Toy Story 3, and it feels like Pixar took some inspiration from the scene where Buzz meets a bunch of recalled toys and featured a similar idea in the short film Small Fry, where Buzz meets a bunch of fast food toys who have been forgotten and abandoned. So yeah, Pixar made their own version of Toy Story 3, and as for Circle 7, with all the projects they had planned, they managed to complete nothing. The company was quietly shut down in 2006, and that was it. So there you have it, Circle 7's version of Toy Story 3. Not as great as the Pixar version, but I still think it's very interesting. And that concludes the original Toy Story trilogy. And it's amazing how different these ideas were compared to their final versions. As for what my least favorite and favorite ideas were, well, I'm glad that the Black Friday whale didn't end up being made into the final film. But I am rather curious of what Circle 7's version of Toy Story 3 could have been like. And I'm sure in the future we'll get some more info on how Toy Story 4 was going to be drastically different. But until then, this is Melting Man 234 signing out.